Eric Shinseki is gone. What took so long? Thanks for getting up with us this Saturday morning, the last full day of May. It's been a busy 24 hours of news. We want to get to as much of it as we can this morning, and we're going to begin with the unscheduled appearance that President Obama made yesterday around lunchtime before the reporters who cover his administration. It came right after he had met with Eric Shinseki, his embattled Secretary of Veterans Affairs.
And a few minutes ago, Secretary Shinseki offered me his own resignation. With considerable regret, I accepted. He has worked hard to investigate and identify the problems with access to care. But as he told me this morning, the VA needs new leadership to address them. He does not want to be a distraction because his priority is to fix the problem and make sure our vets are getting the care that they need.
Speculation on Thursday had been that Shinseki's time was running short at the VA. At that day's briefing, White House Press Secretary Carney deflected questions about whether Shinseki still had the president's support. And one day earlier than that, on Wednesday, preliminary report from the VA's own internal watchdog confirmed the abuse is taking place at a VA hospital in Phoenix, where officials cooked the books to make it seem like wait times for veterans to receive treatment were only about 3 weeks instead of 3 months. The report also said that investigators were seeing similar problems at other VA hospitals all across the country. In a speech yesterday morning before a veterans group, Secretary Shinseki said he had started already the process of firing top managers at the VA hospital in Phoenix, that he took responsibility and that he apologized to his fellow veterans for the systemic problems at the agency. Within a few hours, he would be gone from his job, which means it will now be up to someone else to keep trying to fix the decades of mismanagement that have plagued veterans' health care in this country. Problems that the Bush administration wasn't able to fix, nor the Clinton administration before that, nor the first President Bush, nor Reagan, nor Carter, nor Ford. You get the idea. This is a long-term problem. I want to welcome this morning's panel, MSNBC contributor Sam Stein, political editor and White House correspondent with the Huffington Post, Mike Pesca. He's a sports contributor at NPR and host of the podcast Hang Up and Listen at Slate. L. Joy Williams, she is a political strategist and president of the Brooklyn NAACP chapter. And full disclosure, I just found out before the show that Sam is a former student of Mike's. This may or may not violate the rigorous ethics code.
I owe him everything. You can have my pastry, right?
He taught you radio. Is that what you were
Which is
saying?
why I'm not in radio, yeah.
Ringing endorsement, Professor Pesca.
Mr. Chip situation.
So let's look at this VA situation to start with. I know there's a lot to talk about here. I guess I'm interested at first in sort of what does this, we talk about the politics of this. This was a political question for the last 2 weeks in terms of Shinseki. You know, lots of calls for him to go, started with Republicans, then the red state Democrats started peeling off, and by the end it wasn't even just red state Democrats, and President Obama gave in. There are reports out there that suggest, surprise, surprise, President Obama did not necessarily appreciate the pressure he was feeling to do this, and this is not a decision that he wanted to make. It reminds me a little bit of what we were having, back in the fall when the healthcare website came out and there were all the calls to get rid of Kathleen Sebelius, and he resisted back then. Did we learn something? Did this moment, this week, this episode reveal anything about the president, about his leadership style, his strategy? The fact that it did take a while to get to this point, and he seems to have gotten there begrudgingly. Did we learn something about President Obama?
I think what we learned, using the example, as you said, for the healthcare rollout, is that he has real confidence in the people that he picked. And he wants to stand by them. He's loyal to them. And while there may be problems, mismanagement issues, that he's a little hesitant to sort of just blame it all on them, because ultimately he's the person who picked them to lead. And so it reveals a little bit about his loyalty to his team, and allowing them to, yes, make huge mistakes, but also wanting to stand by them and sort of not be pressured by public or what he thinks are political motives to have someone fall on this.
I mean, the White House almost has you can see they have a disdain for the cable news culture, the hair on fire, the, quick reactionary culture of Washington, D.C. And the way, when you talk to any of these aides on background, the way they describe is that the president wants to be thorough about this, that he wants to think it through, that he doesn't want to be reactionary, and that is a better way of handling the situation. The problem with that is that you end up sort of allowing behavior to go unpunished when it should be punished. And I think in this case, clearly there was a need for accountability, right? I mean, the president got up there at the briefing room and was talking about all these incredible problems at the VA with the computer system after he said Shinseki was resigning. The problems that he was talking about with the computer system were well known 6 years ago. The idea that this is a new, discovery is a little bit alarming, that people think this is new. So clearly, the president should probably be more involved at that level, and I think his cool, detached demeanor maybe got him in trouble.
Well, that's, and I was thinking about that this week, Mike, because a lot of the coverage about this, obviously, I mean, there was the coverage was, will Shinseki stay, will Shinseki go? And then sort of a subset of that was, well, does it even make a difference when you look at the problems and you look at how vast this is? Does it really matter who's running it? But at the same time, there is something to be said for, when something like this happens, people look to the president, whoever the president is, people look to the president to take action, to do something. And in some ways, that's what these cabinet secretaries exist for, isn't it? I mean, you put them in your administration, something big goes wrong, you make a statement by firing them.
If you have an executive branch and if you're going to administer Veterans Affairs, it needs to be administered well. And that, I think, is the big difference between healthcare and even something like the IRS scandal, which he dismisses, right? He, first of all, looks at healthcare. That's part of his agenda, and that's something that defines him. And what's going on with the Veterans Affairs, I mean, that's something that should be done as best as it can be done, but it's not a defining agenda item. And then he looks at other scandals where he's been criticized for, like the IRS, and he says, who are the victims there? Some Republicans who claim that they weren't given tax-exempt status. He really feels, and I think all throughout Washington, they really feel a lot of sympathy for the veterans. But, I did notice in your intro to the piece, you used 3 proper names, right? It was Carney, Shinseki, and Obama. And today, there's one who's still in power. And that's the point, right? But sometimes people have to go because the president needs to forge on with what he needs to do.
And I think just as a managerial exercise, I get where the administration is coming from. I don't know what good it would have done if on day 3 of this scandal exploding, they said, yeah, Shinseki's gone. Because you still have to find a replacement. You still have to have a plan to reform the VA because, the truth be told, if he's gone, it doesn't fix the problem. So I get why the administration said, okay, slow down.
Well, the other question, too, is Shinseki himself. Was the administration also, I wondered all week, was Obama sort of making it clear to Shinseki, hey, wouldn't be the worst thing if you came to me and said, I want to leave.
Oh, I'm sure.
Shinseki, I'm looking at this Thursday, Friday morning, and I'm saying, how does Shinseki think he is possibly going to survive this? And one thing that I kept coming back to was how Shinseki got into the administration in the first place. If you remember back in mid-aughts, is that what we call it, the mid-00s?
Yes.
Mid-aughts.
Sure.
Right, so when Iraq is sort of is falling apart, and people look back at Shinseki's predictions about the troop levels and said, wow, he was prescient. The Bush administration didn't listen to him. They got rid of him. He became the sort of hero on the left, on the anti-war left, and so it became like for President Obama when he came into office, you got to find a place in your administration for him. He's a genuine hero. He was very smart in Iraq. What they had him do, though, really didn't have anything to do with military policy making. What they had him doing was administering a giant healthcare bureaucracy. He may not have been cut out for this from the beginning.
Right, and truth be told, in talking about agencies and the policies we have across this country that have been broken for a long time. Right. And what is required to fix them may not just be a great manager. It's a combination of things. It's Congress doing what they're supposed to do, the administrating, highlighting the issue, changing antiquated systems. Like, there are all of those things that need to go into fixing a system like the VA system. And what he neglected to do is sort of be that spokesperson, or at least the administration didn't allow him to sort of help be that spokesperson for that, which would have continued the service he had already given before in talking about that we weren't ready and in sort of doing the warning. But, so if he would have been the administrator that also was continuing to sound the alarm, and the administration letting him sort of run with that, I think it would have been a little different situation.
I think it's very difficult. And when you listen to, say, former Defense Secretary Gates, who will criticize the administration, he has done so in the book, he has said, he has complimented Shinseki, and he has said he has spearheaded efforts, and it's just such a hard culture to get anything to change. And I think it's just such this huge irony that one of the reasons that he was dealing with this influx of patients is because he wasn't listened to for the Iraq.
That's right. That's right.
And I don't think it was even just rewarding a hero. He was a very competent person, and I think it is quite possible that even if he made mistakes, and certainly the optics, you're right, the PR aspect didn't get that right, but it is quite possible that this is way too big a lift for even one heroic individual.
Yeah, well, and that's the question now is who comes in there next, who replaces him, and we'll find out and we'll follow. But you alluded to this a second ago, Mike. After Shinseki, President Obama was not done yesterday. A few hours later, he was back in the briefing room, and he made some more news.
You haven't seen me enough today. One of Jay's favorite lines is, I have no personnel announcements at this time. But I do, and it's bittersweet. It involves one of my closest friends here in Washington. In April, Jay came to me in the Oval Office and said he was thinking about moving on, and I was not thrilled, to say the least. But Jay's had to wrestle with this decision for quite some time.
No word from Jay Carney on what he plans to do next, but he used to be the Washington bureau chief at Time magazine. Deputy Press Secretary Josh Earnest will take his place at the podium. So, you know, I mean, look, every time there's a resignation in Washington, in the White House, we always look for the dark story, you know, in the corner. Oh, this is what really was. This seems pretty much on the surface like it was time. You know, Jay Carney figured it was time to leave. I always look at Jay Carney, and I remember, and I think of the McLaughlin Group. I don't know. You know, Jay Carney was one of the panelists on the John McLaughlin PBS show.
Your hero.
And I could never get my head around the idea that this guy was now, you know, giving official statements on behalf of politics. It was a strange thing, and it brings me to that. The thing I saw, maybe we'll put this out there to see if you have any thoughts on this. But Dave Weigel at Slate wrote this in response to yesterday's news about Jay Carney stepping down as White House press secretary. He said, "Jay Carney's retiring. Let's not replace him." And Dave Weigel's argument is basically, the White House press secretary is basically designed to stand in front of a room and not give you answers. You know, not give the press answers to the questions they're asking. It's to say, hey, call this department, call that department. And I don't know, these things have sort of become shows. They broadcast them live on cable news every day. I've never really heard anything that meaningful from Jay Carney. Maybe I'm missing it. Sam, you're down there.
I'm down there.
Is it a valuable job?
So we have this debate probably every 2 months about whether or not the briefing itself is useful, because clearly you need a press secretary for your president, but is the briefing itself a useful exercise? And, you know, I admit I'm a little bit torn on it because it is a show in some respects. And what you end up happening is the front row, which is all the TV personalities, will go there and they will all ask the same question or variation of, because they need to feed the news of the day. And so you sit there and it becomes repetitive. You get the same exact question, basically the same exact answers with a lot of...
And they're looking for that quote,
however,
15-second quote.
However, and this is for, you know, to reward the people in the back of the room, which I am one of them, there are a lot of people who have sort of off-kilter questions, who want to talk about topics that aren't the news of the day, maybe, and press the administration on them. And that's a valuable outlet to have for people who aren't in TV.
Do they get valuable answers from him?
Well, it doesn't matter. You aren't guaranteed the answers, and it's up to you to try to figure out how to get the best information you can out of Jay Carney. I think we would be worse off if we didn't at least have an hour a day, the press at least didn't even have an hour a day, to at least try. And I think it's still valuable to have the briefing, even though it's become a bit of a circus.
Yeah. See, I think that you could accomplish that, and I agree with my Slate colleague Dave Weigel. I think you could accomplish that privately, one-on-one, outside the television camera. You could ask the guy, and
that's what they used to do, right? They used to be.
Yeah, well, it used to be done, but it wasn't on TV. But the problem with that is that they have an easier avenue for evasion in that case, which is that they just don't return your calls.
Oh, and so what we're seeing from him is not evasion.
Oh, it's totally evasion, but at least you have the chance.
Televised evasion.
Televised evasion, yeah.
More accountable.
And that goes to accountability. But wouldn't that also sort of disenfranchise a number of outlets and a number of sort of, like you said, those folks in the back of the room, those individuals that would not be able to build up that access?
I think not. I think that everyone kowtows to the television asking the same question all the time. Look, I think Jay Carney's a great guy. I think he only made 2 mistakes, taking the job and doing it well. Because what this job is, we as taxpayers pay a guy to not answer questions that we need answered. And now I know the press isn't elected, but still, they serve a purpose to try to get answers, and we put this guy out there, and Jay's doing what he's paid to do, and he's not immoral or unethical, but he's just giving non-answers, evasions. In that Weigel column, you know, he just quotes chapter and verse all the non-answers he gave on the Shinseki thing. I mean, ridiculous non-answers that I guess everyone said, well, I guess you have to say that, and then finally...
Not to get too meta, though, I mean, in some respects, the non-answers and evasion of the Shinseki story became a story in its own right. So, for instance, when the president said that he was sticking by Shinseki last week, and then Jay came out to the briefing room, and he was pressed repeatedly on whether or not the president stood by his words, and Jay said Jay could not answer that question. In a weird meta way, that became a story. It showed that the administration had moved a little bit on Shinseki, and it foretold the fact that Shinseki's resignation was coming soon. In fact, it came the next day.
I tell you, my brief stint in Washington as a reporter, I did not play well with press secretaries. So when I see a story like this, I'm sympathetic to it. I remember I had a call from one of them once. I wrote something she didn't like, her boss didn't like it. They argued it with me for 20 minutes. I wouldn't give in. They said, oh, well, that's it. I want to talk to your editor. Give me your editor's number. Yeah. And so I said, well, I'll give you my parent's number, too. You can call them. that did not help.
Record, right?
We got a few more things to go over. News from a possible 2016 nominee. We'll be right back.